Shannon and I are actually kind of playing characters when we do this. So actually, let's start again here, right? I'd like to introduce Shane Hobson. Shane Hobson does a whole pile of different things, including recently you've been the chair of Web Access Waikato.
Yes, so we give away internet and stuff to people who don't have internet.
That's fantastic. He also does stuff like you work for Bypass Network Services.
Yes.
I'm also right there.
Yes.
What's one of the things that Bypass Network Services does, Shane?
We help ISPs filter the internet.
Hey, there we go. So that's my job of introducing Shane, and I'm going to put Shane on the spot of introducing me.
Oh, I've got one of those, haven't I? It's a talking stick, isn't it? Andrew Cushen, Internet NZ. Internet NZ believes in an open and unencumbered internet with no bottlenecks or filtering or any of that nonsense applied to it. So we are at absolute opposite ends of the spectrum on this topic we have here today.
So here's how we're going to do this, right? In real time between you, in front of you, I should say, Shane and I are going to argue this point. I'd like to invite you people to join our conversation. If you've got a point that you want to try and reinforce, if you've got a point that you want to disagree with, if you want to lob something into this that you don't think we're considering, bring it up, all right? You guys collectively are the third party in this conversation. Now, I'm going to continue to do my cheesy thing as well of a bit, whose line is it anyway, scoring our debate.
We should have got someone impartial.
I don't know whether the crowd can challenge my scoring at any particular time and overrule it in that particular way. So shall we see who wins? Who won our first debate?
It was even.
And
I was genuinely surprised at that outcome because I felt that I probably didn't have the strongest starting position, which is probably the position I'm in today.
I think he just said that I actually deserved to lose. Well, we'll see how we go in round two.
So I've got a couple of slides here which are reminders to me for points. It's not a presentation. And interspersed in those are some quotes I stole from a presentation yesterday, so the green text are quotes from school kids commenting on internet stuff. There's a couple of those in there. The rest of them are just conversation starters. Yeah.
So off we go. Mandatory filtering of our internet by government agencies is appropriate for New Zealand. The pro party is Shane. The negative party is me. Let's go. Show us your slides.
So our government filters our real-world experience today. The Censorship Office views movies we watch in the movie theatres, they look at magazines and look at books, and they apply filtering and age restrictions to that type of content today. And I don't see people in the streets protesting about the Censorship Office or what we're up to. We accept that, and I don't see why the internet gets a get-out-of-jail-free card and doesn't have censorship applied to it of any form.
What should we be censoring, Shane? I mean, look, let's have a look at the way that book example works from the Censorship Office. There's a particular discrete publication normally, right, that is interviewed by a duly legislated agency and all that other jazz, and according to the rubric that they apply, they deem a publication to be offensive and unable to be read, right? Really roughly speaking about how censorship stuff works, but it's discrete. It knocks out a single title, right? How do you apply that to the internet? You start filtering the internet. The internet's not designed just to be a discrete intervention of saying, oh, just that little bit's not okay. You risk breaking the internet, mate.
It's possible to block individual domains. Oh. So if your objectionable content or content which is deemed illegal or not suitable for our consumption. So since it comes to a genuine belief that the material served up by a domain is not appropriate, then the technology exists to block access to that domain.
But that's almost from feast to famine now. I mean, I don't even know how many web pages there are out there. Billions?
Yep.
Are there not?
Loads.
How large is the Censorship Office going to need to be under this dystopian nightmare you're promoting, where we've got this government reviewing the entire internet to see what goes in this filter? I don't even know how this would work practically, and I don't know why I'm jumping on practicality first, but here we are.
It could be reactionary. So instead of proactively looking at every single web page being published, the Censorship Office could be reacting to reports from people, or it could be subscribing to lists from overseas. So one example is there's a commonly used filter applied where dealing with what the contents of a list are is sorted out by a third party overseas. We don't have to think about it. We just need to reach a policy decision to apply that filter in a New Zealand context.
Okay.
So we don't need an army of people. We just need 4 people to enact the filter, apply it, and walk away.
Okay.
Because a party we trust on the other side of the world is taking care of it.
Because a party we trust on the other side of the world with a list that we haven't been able to build ourselves has said that this particular collection of websites is not acceptable. We should import that list and block everybody in New Zealand from seeing it.
Conceivably.
I'm not comfortable with that process, Shane.
That's one possibility.
And I'm not sure whether the other people would be comfortable in that process too, but thank you, our first audience intervention. Here it comes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so just when you guys talk about the specific internet filtering, does that just mean that you're blocking people who aren't technologically skilled? Like nothing stops someone using a Tor browser or a VPN or some other technique to access that if they're on the skill level, you know, like you're basically blocking just a low tier technology user. Is that right?
I actually think he's got a good point.
He's got a good point, but so I really wanted this to be a debate on the philosophical principles of filtering rather than getting sidetracked into... I'm happy to answer your question. I will answer your question. But it's distracting to say it won't work because, or it won't work because. We put R18 stickers on magazines and bookshops, but we know that the determined 14-year-old will get his hands on that magazine if he wants to. But we don't stop putting those R18 stickers on the magazines because a small portion of the dedicated 14-year-olds get them. We know that we've stopped the majority of children who are trying to access that material from getting access to it. So that's great. That's better than not applying that age restriction. There are holes and filters.
Shane, my dear friend, I understand that you'd like to not have to talk about things that this dear gentleman brought up, but I actually think it's inherent to this debate. One of the key challenges around internet filtering is that it is a pretty blunt tool. The internet is designed as a network of networks to route around damage, and something like the blocking of a site for a particular jurisdiction is exactly the sort of thing that the internet is designed to work around in order to ensure that it still remains accessible. So you're at risk of doing one of 2 things. One, a really imprecise solution that actually only collects those that are less technologically able, while everybody who is more technologically able is easily able to route around. But also, 2, you're kind of fighting against the internet itself in order to do this. The technology is a big part of this.
Technology races at a terrific rate. we might implement a policy today, hypothetically, and it takes a little bit of time for the technology to catch up with what we're trying to achieve.
I do not see the benefit of talking about the philosophical background of something that is practically not doable based on what just has been said.
I'm going to take this as a point. I reckon this is worth 5 points.
5 points? 5 points.
I also reckon that you preparing slides beforehand is actually worth 5 points too, to be truly honest.
What, for me? 5 points for me? Oh,
yes.
Thank you. So that was my earlier point. Yeah, so I've done.
Look, filtering is not something that the internet does well, right? But we've got a couple of other hands up there from people that would love to join this debate too. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. You're also with something.
So the part of it, for me, is around the development of critical thinking, that if you just use these blunt tools so that people don't get exposed to things, then they don't get the chance to develop the critical thinking skills to be able to evaluate for themselves what they want to see and what they want to learn from. I think that education in critical thinking skills is a much better way of protecting people than filtering, and the useful curation of the internet. It comes down to what libraries do as well. We try and provide everything that's there, but we curate it in a way so that children are more likely to find what's suitable for them, but we don't block them from accessing the other stuff.
But your stuff is filtered. In the libraries, you're consuming filtered internet. Aren't you?
Ooh. The microphone left.
So your comment was education is the solution to how you manage children on an unsafe internet environment. How do we teach our children how to swim? We either stand in a swimming pool next to them and teach them this arm goes over this arm, or we stand back and we throw them in the pool and just, I'm sure you'll figure it out.
I'm not sure
eventually.
which one of those two, it's a wonderful analogy, but which
Thank
one
you.
of those two is censoring the internet? I mean, look,
It's
if I was to sell your point back to you, if I may, and you can tell me how well I do here, the thing that censorship of the net does, that filtering of the net does, is that it tells you a lot about the values of the person who's choosing what's on the censored list. It doesn't give anybody else the opportunity to learn themselves about how they make their own choices about
The
what they
analogy
see
is
or not.
putting a fence around
Exactly.
the swimming pool.
Thank you. That's
I'm taking
exactly
that as a
their
point.
All right.
6-5.
Okay, it's easy to say that you can get round filters technologically and the like, but the reality is if, I don't want to see this stuff, right? And if it's blocked, then I can't stumble across it accidentally. If I somehow get to it, then I've had to deliberately try and circumvent the filters to get illegal content, and that in itself is an admission of guilt. So it tells the people that if they're going to bypass these filters, that they are in fact basically breaking the rules, and that's why personally I believe that effective filters, as long as there's no false positives coming up in them, and that's a whole different issue, are good for society because they do protect people against accidental or even sort of plausible denial of the fact that they have this material.
I'll take that as a point, thank you. Thank you very much.
We haven't even discussed it yet. So look, there
I'm
are
touching a
clearly parts of the internet that include, by any decent definition, material that is abhorrent, right? Yeah. And there are the obvious examples of what this is: content that anyone who wishes to access it is clearly admitting that they wish to commit a crime, right? Yeah. But there are a couple of, I don't think that necessarily the internet is that clear cut. And the practical reality is, thank you, Julia, that there are examples of everywhere that this has been done, that's a really simple thing to say in practice, but a really difficult thing to do. Sorry, it's a really easy thing to say in theory and a really difficult thing to do in practice, right? Let's take the Australian filtering example and that poor dentist that was knocked offline because his site was deemed to be kiddie porn, right? Now, people probably were evading that because they simply wanted to have their root canal done, not because they wanted to see
stop here? So, here's a slide here. So, don't use the word term kiddie porn because pornography is legal and it's an activity which occurs between adults.
Yep.
What you're talking about is child sexual abuse.
Thank you for correcting my language.
We can abbreviate that to CSA.
Yep.
It's not kiddie porn.
All right, that's a really good point, and
Thank
I
you.
apologise.
Yep. Carry on.
So look, there is an example all over the place of where we start filtering online that we actually do run the risk of false positives. Are we better off not allowing adults? That prohibition that you talk about and that moral shame of going to things that you shouldn't go to is always there anyway. Do we really need to put a block on there too?
But it's about stopping people accidentally arriving there. People who, it gives a parent confidence that they can hand a tablet to an 8-year-old and be reasonably confident we're not going to stumble over something which is going to harm that child. You can achieve, it's like putting a fence around a swimming pool. I can let the kids run around in the backyard and not have to worry about them drowning in the pool because I put a fence around it. The determined 15-year-old who is committed to having a swim in the pool will climb the fence somehow, and they will use Tor browser or a VPN or something and will find it. This is about preventing accidental consumption.
I'm going to move away, I think, from the swimming pool metaphor, even though it is a great one, actually, for the purpose of your argument. I haven't heard you award yourself a point yet, admittedly. Windows open.
I'll take a point.
All right.
Thank you.
We're at 6 all, I think. Is my score count right? Because I don't think the swimming pool analogy is quite right. Let's go back to the actual real world here and talk about that tablet. If you're worried about what your child wants to do right now, you as a parent have the option to install on your devices and the devices that you give to your child a filtering solution. You can choose to mediate the internet that they're exposed to according to the rules of your household. That feels to me like a better solution than applying a whole of internet, whole of country, whole of law block that imposes a single set of values on everyone.
So when I drive back to Hamilton tonight, I trust that NZTA has put safety barriers alongside the road I'm going to use. They're not saying to me, well, if you feel you need safety barriers, you bring your own posts and barriers and you put them up and you take them down again when you're finished with that bit of a road. And the other guys who don't care about their safety, who are more competent drivers than me, will navigate along the motorway without safety barriers.
My point at this point.
Why does a parent have to understand the technology, which their 8-year-old probably understands far better than they do, to put safety barriers around it? They're going to take the easy option and just not hand that device to the 8-year-old.
We've got a couple of people desperate to join us here.
So related to what you're just talking about, I think that also, it's the sort of behavioural economics nudge argument, isn't it? You know, that if you say, no, it's up to you, the tools are out there, it puts all the responsibility onto the user, and especially in the digital arena, that means that that's another thing for parents to try to figure out for themselves when they're trying to catch up. So I think it almost comes down to the blame the user for not doing what they should do when it's actually not their responsibility.
I think that this is one of the key aspects of any filtering debate. I'm almost taking off my debate hat now, right? That if you see a way that different audiences and users of the internet should be able to condition what they see online, right? Then we debate what level that intervention should be on. So I think that this is actually a really useful part of this debate. I'm absolutely on the side that you do have the technology options to deploy that yourselves, your family, according to your values. And that's always going to be more precise according to your interests and what you believe in than any government-mandated solution. How can one set of national values be as useful in a utility sense than something that you design yourself, Shane?
We have it now, the Censorship Office. The Censorship Office in New Zealand today, generally speaking, represents the views of collective New Zealand society. And I think I can say that confidently because I don't see people complaining about the Censorship Office and 3 hands go up. So there will be exceptions, absolutely. Generally speaking, most of society, there will be exceptions.
Yeah, I'm torn on several fronts. I think that schools should have filtered internet. I don't think the current filtering is good enough based on parents that I know have primary age children. Apparently there's a trade in pornography amongst primary age children. It's shocking. But I think that there are some things that society generally find unacceptable, exploitative practices and so on. And I think probably people shouldn't be allowed to access that stuff as a matter of choice. But I'm an Internet NZ counsellor. I'm for an open and uncapturable internet, and yet I'm torn on this point of, exploitation. And I guess the problem is that people go for the legal stuff. It's a bit like legal drugs. Painkillers, for example, can potentially lead to illegal drugs that can lead to, one thing can lead to another, and it's, people can easily fall into this kind of trap. And it's important to, of course, to teach critical thinking, but if people have been exposed to things before they've been taught to critically think about those things, it kind of makes it much more difficult. So unfortunately, it raises more questions than it provides answers.
That's exactly why we're debating it. Thank you, Richard. I think there's a couple of things that I'd like to pick up on out of that particular example. Right. Exploitative material. Yes. Clear-cut examples of where something is exploitative, though, I think might be hard to find. So if somebody's running a scam site, for example, maybe that's something that is, but one person's scam is another person's bargain, surely. I mean, where do we start to apply some of these value judgments? Do you see what I mean? Commerce could be a place that we start to apply it, but actually my web browser does some of that for me already. It pops up a warning that says, your site may be out to rip you off. You sure you want to go there? Thanks, Chrome. I can now make an informed choice around that. But you also invoked a slippery slope there. I think, too, Richard. And slippery slopes can apply in a couple of ways, in a way, can't they? Because we start now judging what's a good offer and what's fraud instead. What if we start now judging different ideas? This idea is too radical. It needs to be censored. This whole communist or capitalism thing, we're going to start filtering sites according to that too. Like I said beforehand, Shane, what's the genie you're letting out of the bottle here? What's this Pandora's box you're opening? How much of the internet in 10 years' time would we have blocked under this dystopian regime of yours?
So scope creep, that's a valid concern, and scope creep is entirely valid in a society where technology changes and societal values change. Scope creep doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It could be creeping the other direction. So if you look at what the Censorship Office bans today, if you look at what they banned 50 years ago versus what they ban today, scope has crept back. The tide is receding. There is far more material available on the bookshelf today that wasn't available 50 years ago because the censor deemed that it wasn't acceptable in New Zealand society. Parents' responsibility, I just want to touch on that. It takes a village to raise a child. We've all heard that. We all pay the price for bad parenting, either through prisons or a wide range of other adverse outcomes. So we can't always trust that parents are going to do an awesome job. We need to help them, and this is one of the ways that we can help them.
Got another interjection.
Yeah, thanks. Look, there's two things I want to mention. One is the theme of this Nethui is freedom, and I think this is where internet filtering for me fits in with that. That we use the internet largely to find information that we then apply our critical thinking to. It helps form our critical thinking, and a lot of us don't want that filtered because we want to see the range of the full range, one extreme to another of what's out there on the internet to help form our critical thinking. I do agree that parents do have a responsibility. Hey, they've taken on a hell of a lot of responsibilities when they have their children. This is just one more that they have to buy into, is they have to click a filter that they turn on to protect their young children and maybe even their early teenagers against the bad stuff out there. But if we want a free internet and we want it to help form our critical thinking and a better society, we should be able to be exposed to everything that's out there and not have it filtered by somebody. The second point, Shane, I'm sorry, I don't think you have a philosophical perspective here if you say you're just going to copy the blacklists that come from overseas providers, okay? You don't know how they form that. I mean, you don't know what assumptions they put into that. And if they come from the US, well, yeah, I think there's a whole lot of assumptions that US-minded people put into what they ban that doesn't agree with our way of life here. So, yeah, I mean, just saying that you'll copy them, no, that's not philosophical at all. That's just a technological fix, just like he was saying before about circumventing it as a technological fix. You're no different there.
Balls in your court.
Let's see what I've got on my laptop. Oh yeah, that's something I wanted to ask. So this is probably an Internet NZ point of view. The internet is just a collection of dumb pipes. We shouldn't care about what's passing through the pipes. It'd be sort of
I don't quite necessarily agree with the wording, but like the internet's technology.
Roughly along those lines.
It's a network of networks that allow people to exchange information. It's the ability of us as human beings to judge the information that we share.
Am I
wildly
wrong here?
Oh, I don't like that language, but I think...
Who has a water filter in their home to stop rubbish coming out of the plumbing because you don't trust the town water supply?
I think I enjoy your rhetorical flourish, putting this in terms of plumbing, but I think we're a bit off. There's some more interjectors that wants in. Who's got their hand up?
Just to add to the point about the village, it takes a village, that's a very sound point and that's why we have the rule of law, that's why we have government. We can't do everything by ourselves. It's all very well saying we can be critical thinkers, but I don't think I think we all need a hand, and that's where the role of government steps in.
So there could be a role for filtering sometimes. It's exactly what we elect our government to do. I'm not going to agree with you on that point, but I do understand that point. Thank you.
So I just have a question. So what is the solution you think? Like, how do you deal with the issue of child exploitation? I mean, to me, it sounds like a supply and demand, and if you introduce censorship, at least you can assist that in some way.
Child exploitative imagery is abhorrent, right? But the internet is designed to exchange information. And those two things don't necessarily need to be conflated in a way. We can declare something to be absolutely intolerable content that has no place in the societies that we live in, while at the same time not using the internet that we all enjoy and that's designed to be a protocol that connects to all places, and encumbering its function in that regard. Look, time and time again we see these very rightful justifications of installing filtering for any number of different purposes. But the thing is that the technology doesn't work well, it's subject to false positives, and it risks breaking the thing that works so well as a way of having exploitation. It's a way of sharing information. God, that was uncomfortable. I'm taking a point off. That was terrible. Look, the wonderful thing is that we all retain the ability to be rational adults that can make our own decisions about what we're looking to. We all retain the ability to sit there and say, I know that this is bad, I know that I don't need to see it, I know that this is an idea I disagree with, and make our decision as to whether or not we still go there. Isn't that a good thing?
You're trusting that all of your neighbours are rational human beings.
I do trust that all of our
Look at America. How many shootings are there? Are they rational people?
I respect the right that somebody in America can build a website devoted to his love of assault rifles, right? I'm not going to go look at that webpage, but I don't need to have it filtered out of my view because I don't like it. Let him have his internet as he likes it. He can share that page with gun aficionados from around the world. Doesn't mean that my eyes have to go there. Doesn't mean that my fingers have to type in that URL. I can filter everything I like as much as I like because I have the capacity to make that decision.
But if a neighbour doesn't have the capacity to make that decision and is consuming harmful content, which he then takes a step further and turns it into stepping over your fence and acting out what he's seen, this is a stretch. Wouldn't you feel better that stuff hasn't been made available to him? Wouldn't you sleep better at night?
Shane, I'm not worried that Grand Theft Auto is teaching people how to run me down the next time I walk around the streets. I have more faith in humanity than that, but we also have a new interjection.
I find that we are a little bit stuck at the filtering or no filtering sort of binary thing. And also saying, okay, if the state doesn't filter, then the parent has to do it. The parent is overwhelmed, so what do we do now? Why don't we start thinking about what government or whoever is here, the filtering agent, because that's also a little bit unclear to me, who is envisaged as being the filterer. Why don't we start thinking about how do we support that parent to use the technology or apply the technology or choose the technology or be aware of the technology that helps him or her to protect his or her child and maybe even the neighbor's child.
Is this a conversation instead about how mandatory filtering is, instead talking about how we can make those informed choices and options more accessible so that people can make their own decisions about what they see online?
So what do you do for the parent who wants to apply filtering to their child's devices, but a technical solution doesn't exist? Yeah, and if your
ISP-based opt-in filtering was the suggestion. ISP level filtering? I mean, look, there's still a market mechanism there, isn't there? If you want to be one of those people that sits there and says, I want to be able to go where I like because I don't trust you to filter my internet.
Yep.
I don't have to choose Stuff Fibre. I don't have to turn it on. I'm not sure why we need a government-led solution.
Does Stuff Fibre provide a mobile phone service? I know the answer to that is no. Yeah. So how does that parent provide for a safe internet experience for their child on their mobile phone when they step out of a home? Yeah. Yeah, but currently there isn't a technical solution available for a parent who wants to filter on their child's smartphone once they step outside of their Wi-Fi. Yep.
Got another contribution down the back here.
We've got someone else who has been waiting just as long for their question.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually very disappointed that you didn't answer the point about the fact that the filter, there was the allegation that the filter is simply taking overseas lists of banned sites and not reviewing them and bringing them in. I really would have liked to have heard that addressed. The other thing is the case of the Aussie dentist. Well, I would say that if you're providing a filter, there should be strict liability, that if you block some innocent person's site claiming it's a porn site or whatever, that surely is liable and they should be able to claim damages.
I will answer your question. Do you want to answer the dentist?
No, you go first.
No? Okay. So you're right, I didn't answer that, I was saving it. So the answer to this question, I was expecting this to come up as an objection as well. And the answer to that question is there is already government-controlled filtering applied to every consumer of broadband internet of these ISPs. So that's probably better than 70% of the population. So if anybody was feeling that having government-controlled filtering was abhorrent and was going to be the end of the internet, well, most of us are consuming it already. How does that?
No, that wasn't the point. The point was that you're taking lists from overseas.
Yep, so the filtering that we're applying is built by the Department of Internal Affairs, and the DIA uses two inputs. Hopefully maybe there's someone from DIA here who can clarify for me. The DIA uses two inputs. One is a list which is called the worst of the worst. And the worst of the worst list is a list of domains which host material which is illegal in most jurisdictions. So generally, so child sexual abuse images would fit into that category, where it's generally accepted that it's not acceptable in any jurisdiction. So where CSA filters are applied, they're usually consuming the worst of the worst list. DIA, in addition, is checking other domains and adjusting the filter before it's shipped out to the consumers of the filter. So in a New Zealand concept, when I talked about importing a list, I was referring to the worst of the worst list, and it would likely have localization applied. So DIA might possibly remove domains from that worst of the worst list. I don't imagine they would be, but they would certainly be applying their own as well and feeding those domains that they find up to the aggregator who designs it so that other jurisdictions can benefit from the work they're doing. Did I answer your question?
I'm just going to really quickly hand the mic to a manager from DIA who has put their hand up
Fabulous.
to respond.
Thank you.
Just to be really clear about the filter, I mean, all the information is on the department's website, the independent governance across it, the minutes of the meetings. With respect to the domains in the list, those domains are analysed and visited very frequently by staff within the department, and we can be quite clear that those domains are hosting child exploitation material, absolutely, and it's harmful content. So there'll be no false positives. The URLs which are filtered are hosting child exploitation material, and the ISPs have come on board voluntary in relation to filtering that content.
This looks like a really nice mix to me. I'll admit that. What you have here is a voluntary opt-in mechanism that ISPs can stand back and say, we want to provide that filtering service of that abhorrent material to our customers on our network. But what I'd point out to you here, Shane, in order to reinforce my argument, is that there's still a market mechanism at play here. There's still the ability to stand back and for ISPs to say, I don't want to choose to put that on my network because I have faith, trust in customers that they can make the adult decisions to avoid stuff that is clearly abhorrent and illegal without encumbering my network with this particular solution. What does mandatory filtering add that we already don't? There are mechanisms here that are already working at so many different layers. Why do we need to go further than this?
If I might pose a question to the gentleman from DIA, and you can of course choose to decline. If you had a magic wand and you could have the filter you're providing applied across the board, would that benefit the outcomes you're trying to achieve?
I think with respect to the material that is being filtered, if that solution was applied across the board, there will always be people that will find other ways to access that material. But you have to understand that if it is going to be called a way to filter access at a low level for people to that sort of material, then it is a solution, but it's not the only solution. There's far more solutions that we need and are looking at and working on with respect to the harm that can be accessible, and that goes through to solutions around education, other agencies that can collaborate in this space. So, yeah, filtering is one part of it, but it's far more complex than that.
I want to gently challenge Shane here, and remember, please, people, that we're playing characters here, right? I want to gently challenge you around this digital child exploitation filter, because I feel like actually it's a little bit of an easy red herring that you're dropping into this argument. It's clear digital child exploitation imagery is a far more easy and clear-cut case to talk about filtering on.
Yep.
But I feel like you mean something more than what is just that clearly abhorrent stuff. Do you?
So I'm trying to think of it. So if I had a magic wand and I could block CSA from New Zealand's internet, I would probably wave that magic wand. And if I still had that magic wand in possession and it hadn't been wrestled away from me, the question is there anything else I would block? So throwing ideas around, not saying I would actually block these, bomb recipes. So CSA is an example of material where the consumer is probably not harmed, the person viewing the material, although I'm bound to be a psychologist in the room who will tell me I'm wrong, but there is absolutely a victim at the beginning of a process, at the source. Bomb making, there's clearly no victim at the beginning of a process, but the consumer is empowered to create victims around their neighbourhood.
I think that's a good example.
Yeah, bomb making recipes.
More, right? Yeah. And so, but now I'm going to, yeah, Ben?
I would like to get away a little bit from the porn and to the question you actually have up on the board. Are we dealing with that at the moment? Or are you concerned that government-controlled filtering, cha-cha-cha?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, okay.
Like to take us there, Cherry, go ahead.
Because what you've been talking about, for example, is domain blocking, or type of content blocking. And what I think there is what I'd call spot filtering by government. And I can think of two explicit examples. And you don't actually have to have a corrupt government. You may have a government who is an ideological government, who does not want you to see something, or who's changed the structures of their agencies and may have dumped what took place under a previous government, but does not make it available or redirect to or whatever clearly to Archives New Zealand, where it may not even have the money to put it up, of content which doesn't agree. I'm more concerned about the spot filtering, which can occur, and I've got a couple of explicit examples I could give people, but I will, for courtesy and ethics reason, restrain myself here. People can ask me later, but I think that's another issue too, and I agree in some cases it means that we're not well informed, it means we're not on top of an issue, it means we can't project or react appropriately or provide proof of what we have understood from somewhere overseas, for example, has occurred, affects us definitely, and we're not in a position to be able to provide proof to make a case for something different.
So what do you think, Shane? Do you think that filtering does risk exactly those sorts of slippery slopes? That the things that can start out being really easily justifiable, like child sexual exploitation imagery, bomb making, can start turning into something more insidious when you stop looking?
Because we are experiencing filtering today. We've had, I have no idea how long the censorship office has existed in New Zealand, probably a long time. So we've been on the receiving end of censorship office filtering for decades. And the threshold for allowing material through has decreased over time. What we may have called an R18 movie 20 years ago could well be an R16 movie today.
And that's because values change and evolve over time?
Exactly, yep.
And we have a government agency that...
And separation between the censorship office and DIA and the potentially corrupt politicians who would want to block that sort of thing. We have an election every 3 years, we can chuck them out.
What do you think, Jamie?
I just wonder whether in this part of the debate we're getting a bit stuck around the way the question's been framed. Behind you is the words internet filtering debate, and I think some of the arguments Shane are using the example of the censorship office are getting a bit stuck on that, and that's because the censorship office actually fulfills two functions. At the extreme end it blocks, but most of the time what it does is it classifies. And I'd be interested to look at this debate through that slightly different framing, which is the internet classification debate. Because when I hear comments about end users and they're trying to apply critical thinking and to make decisions about what's appropriate for their home or for their whānau or iwi, a lot of the time the feedback is it's just too hard and too complicated. Mm-hmm. And I sense that if we had if it was easier to have things classified, it would be easier for us to apply critical thinking once that information is in front of us but classified.
Yeah, so if I had my magic wand again and I had the ability to apply age classification across internet content and then gave parents the tools to, very, very simple tools. So set the laptop to R16 and I can hand it to my 16-year-old and know that I don't have to think about it beyond that point. That's probably a good thing. Australia is trying to do that. Hasn't had great uptake, but we're trying to get in that direction. It's a technology problem, predominantly.
It's a technology problem. Look, I really thank you for bringing up that point, Jamie, right? Because what we're talking about in that sense is the ability for users of the internet to make informed choices about what they go and see and what their family goes and sees. That they have the ability to sit there and say, yep, this is something that I want my son, daughter, child, myself to be able to consume online. And I don't think either of us are going to disagree with that. But again, we're talking about at what level and how that's best put in. We're agreeing with each other a lot. So I'm all for informed choices. I can see plenty of ways that could be done. Plenty of ways that it can be done by installing a filter on my machine at home and not imposing your central government.
You've got the skills to do that. There are a bunch of families who don't. I spoke with a parent a few weeks ago whose method of internet filtering is to hand the laptop to her daughter and stand behind her daughter for 30 minutes and watch everything she does. And that was the daughter's internet allocation for the day, half an hour, because that's all the time that mum could spare. That was mum's way of filtering the internet. Is that freedom of access to the internet? Not really,
it might be
no.
more free than just than imposing a block on.
Well, the alternative.
Fertiliser and diesel, pages that say fertiliser and diesel on them, because we're worried about bomb making. I mean, this is part of that slippery slope again.
Shane, I think you kind of hijacked us with the DIA stuff because, I mean, I don't think any of us actually disagree about blocking the CSA and the bomb making, but I mean, I think because you work in the industry, you actually know that from providers like Norton, you get a big long list of all the different categories, and I mean, you could easily have a discussion with your children as to what it is that you want to exclude, you know, whether it's pornography or whether it's terrorism or so-called terrorism or stuff like that, and it would be probably quite a good discussion to have with your teenager as to what they want to be allowed to look at and what you think they should be allowed to look at. I mean, I think it's probably the best way to go. But, you know, I don't think you can even conceive of the idea of R13 or R16 on the internet, because we're not just consuming media. You know, there's so many different types of resources out there on the internet. Kind of, are you going to say an algebra tutorial is R16? Because, you know, kids don't usually do algebra until they're 16 or something, you know. It doesn't make any sense to me that you can apply an age-based filtering to the internet. But, I mean, I do think that you could look at categories such as Norton put out, where they use different areas, and if you trust their classification, that would be a way to start. But we could also grow this in New Zealand. You know, we could say this is a function of governmental regulation, is to produce filters that you can choose to opt into. I mean, this would seem to me to be a smart way forward of progressing this area and protecting young children.
Jamie gave that challenge beforehand, though I think builds off that, right? If we could somehow have a classification regime, Shane, would that be the sort of thing that you think would be a sufficient way of solving this particular debate?
The debate is about mandatory filtering.
Yeah, it is.
Because
if it was
the debate about
mandatory classification instead, would that be enough?
Yes, I think so.
So you still see some room for people to be able to make those informed choices. I might be about to score a point.
There's a question down here. Let's go to a question. Let's go to a question.
Changing gear a bit. So we've been talking about sort of the ideals at the moment, but what I'm interested in is how effective the current regime is at actually preventing these kinds of objectionable materials from actually being received by New Zealanders. Because, you know, we've got Tor, we've got VPNs, we've got all these kinds of mechanisms to get around it. So the people who really want to access it probably can. How effective are these blocks in really preventing the kinds of abuse that we're trying to protect against?
I think we could ask the gentleman from DIA if he wanted to respond to that. But look, from my point of view, right, a block of the nature that we already have was never able to prevent the determined from accessing the material that they like to see. It's an imperfect solution. It's a great solution for preventing those people that inadvertently find themselves on sites that they don't actually intend to consume digital exploitative material. Is that about right? And so, look, yes, I think you're right. Those that really do wish to commit that crime and see that sort of material have always been able to access it somehow, are still able to access it somehow in a variety of different ways.
And there's an argument against filtering. Here's a free point for you.
Oh, thanks.
There's an argument against filtering in that if you have no mandatory filtering blocking access to CSA, then the consumers of that material will consume it across ordinary unencrypted internet connections. Once you apply filtering, they start to employ tools like Tor to access it, and then it becomes much harder to detect for law enforcement to detect. And so you drive the offenders underground, which is probably a bad thing.
Yes. Oh, we've got another interjector.
Just a different angle to inject. I was thinking about malware filtering and what your thoughts are about that. So,
what, sorry?
Malware. So, you know, internet harm coming through could be potentially filtered by ISPs or by government. You're talking about specific, like, say, botnet traffic or something like that that could be disrupted. You know, is there views on that? And does an individual's right to get hacked or maintain their security, you know, trump the possible negative consequences that might have on other people? So by allowing malware to come in and infect someone, does that have consequences for someone else, and is there a responsibility of government or ISPs to manage that?
So I guess there's possibly two questions here. One is, should mandatory filtering of malware be applied? In my opinion, probably no. Is optional filtering of malware available? Yes. This gentleman's given us an example of Stuff Fibre, who provide categorised internet filtering, which is all locked in, and malware is one of those categories. So a family who chooses to buy an opted-in service which has categorisation can block malware.
Let's actually run through a little bit of a catalogue here, right? When I think of the variety of different ways that my internet can be filtered right now, I think we're all actually in a pretty powerful position to make informed choices about what we and the members of our family are seeing online. We can use any number of tools already, Shane, without us needing to resort to having something mandatory and the risks that it exposes us to. So here's the things that come to mind for me, right? One, we've had the great example that we can choose an ISP that's going to do it for us at a variety of different levels. Two, I can choose a browser that's going to filter out different bits and pieces for me. Chrome's doing it now. If I go to a site that's got different software already loaded on it, it pops up a great big red screen and it says, are you sure you want to go here? Because there's some dodgy stuff going on, right? What else can I do? I can install specific software on my machine or in my browser that tops that up even further. Number three, I can install 4. How many am I up to? I'm scoring points for all of these. I can install antivirus stuff that does part of this as well. I can install a safe screen thing if I want to subject Internet Explorer into my life. I'm sure there are thousands actually of other ways of doing this that can be applied actually relatively easily if we go out and we try to learn how to use them. I don't think this bar's that high. Why do we need to do more than this?
So rethinking my answer to your question about, which may have been about mandatory malware blocking, one potential situation where it may be a good idea is where a widespread malware attack has a significant adverse impact on industry, economy, society within New Zealand.
Yeah.
So
Can
hypothetically,
I just wanted to help you here actually, because I work at a university and we don't actually do any filtering at all because of freedom of expression and research. But one thing we do actually block is malware. We don't want the computers to get infected, and we don't want the network to come down. So, I mean, I would agree with you on blocking malware.
Yep.
So actually, thank you, but that throws up a couple of other things too, right? We actually haven't touched on the whole freedom of expression angle here. Now, freedom of expression is actually a vitally important one, I think, in all of this. Again, when we start employing mandatory filters, we're importing the values of the filterer. Your censorship example beforehand, right? Correct me, anyone who's more literary minded than I am here. Catcher in the Rye was banned in a whole pile of different jurisdictions for ages, regarded as one of the classic novels of the 20th century. 1984, regarded as one of the best books on political philosophy of the 20th century, banned in any number of different places too, right? Whenever we start saying that we have a role for a censor in our lives, we're asking them to impose things on us that actually we've seen in the past have not been things that we've enjoyed. Why would we want to extend that to our internet?
So I've got a bit of experience in this area because I was involved in getting a whole lot of restrictions changed which had been imposed by the Indecent Publications Tribunal when that was in existence. And so we submitted some books to get reclassified. And so William Burroughs' The Naked Lunch, for instance, which used to have an R18 rating, is now unrestricted. So the thing about the censorship laws in New Zealand is that they have really good and interesting criteria about the overall work, the intent of the work, and the level of harm done. And there's a huge emphasis on ensuring that harm isn't, the harm of children is not there. But the interpretation, so I was also involved in the whole restriction around the book Into the River by Ted Dorr. which was given an R14 restriction because Family First thought there was too much sex and swearing in it. Now, we challenged that and that was removed. Family First challenged it, and there was a lot of debate around that, including the fact that the office was looking at whether the fact that there was racism and bullying in the book was going to be disturbing to young people, and our argument was that actually young people are experiencing bullying and racism, and if they have access to literature which discusses this, and the overall intent of the book is a good intent, then that should be available for people. So it's the thing about harm. What is worrying is that not only those ideas can change, but they can be very politically driven. So my idea of what's harmful to people is completely different from what Family First thought was harmful to people. And so that is when you talk about scope creep, what you get is the danger of people deciding that anything mentioning homosexuality should not be available for anyone. There are examples of books being challenged in the United States. There's a book called In Tango Makes Three, which is about a gay penguin, which people had tried to have banned. So it is exactly the interpretation where there's risk in those external filters.
So I think, to paraphrase, what you've told, what I've heard is that there is a mechanism in place to update censorship based on changing society values. Yeah, and it sounds like the Family First example is probably an outlier in that they're a minority, perhaps at the time they had a louder voice than the rest of society, and so the censorship ruling went in their direction, but there is a mechanism in place to have that changed in a subsequent review.
It happened in 2014 though.
Yeah.
So if we were to extend, and I'm not saying this again, still playing a character here, but let's look at some of the elements of that particular mechanism that's been talked about. I wonder whether or not, is this a solution you could be looking for, Shane? There is an application process from a government agency that weighs up some legislative factors, that there is some sort of appeals-based mechanism where different parties can challenge a ruling that things are given and seek to have it overturned both at the time and in the future to have things reclassified, and that determines how people can access stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I discuss the idea of mandatory government internet filtering, there's always the detail, which is there needs to be an appeals mechanism. There should be, I was about to say there should be visibility to what's being blocked, but that actually provides a shopping list to consumers of CSA. So that's not such a flash idea. There should be visibility to the policy. So for example, if it's applied, it should say, we're blocking CSA and we're blocking this. We're not going to tell you what's in the CSA list, but we'll tell you that the policy is about blocking CSA. And then so there needs to be visibility, transparency, ability to review and complain about it, get it changed.
What do you think?
I actually wanted to pick up on something that Mark said previously about universities, and it crystallised something for me. I thought if you're talking about a society that's just adults, the argument is completely different because, as you say at your university, there's no need to restrict access because people make those choices themselves. But because a significant part of our society are not adults, and we have lots of protections and lots of different ways for children because we understand that that's important, it's not sufficient for me as a parent in my own home to provide those protections through filtering because the internet is everywhere. So when my child goes to school and sits on the school bus next to someone else with a mobile phone, that's the internet. Or they go to a friend's house, that's the internet. So, you know, we have a special category, children, we have to protect them, and that's why filtering would be valid in a way that it wouldn't be if it was, you know, if our society was only adults.
I'm going to ask right now that actually we are very close / at afternoon tea time. So can I get a show of hands quickly as to those who wish to give their thoughts? I've got one here. Who else? go.
Can I just pick up on the censorship around the gay area? Because, I mean, if gay people don't get to read the books, don't get to see themselves, they're not even going to feel that they've got a right to ask for society's attitudes to change. So, I mean, this is why I don't like the filtering idea, it's got so many judgments from the hierarchy, the status quo in it, that people who are different and don't get to have that space to be themselves. And it's almost like the hierarchy wants to not allow them to be themselves. So, yeah, this is why I don't like filtering.
So you've talked about there are solutions in the form of parents choosing a filtering ISP, parents choosing to apply technology to devices for hand of their children, where the parents have the ability to apply it. So they might opt out of putting technology on devices and just say, we're going to buy our internet from a filtered ISP. A while ago I talked about the strange neighbour with beliefs which don't align with my family values. What do you do if the neighbour opens up his Wi-Fi and is broadcasting unfiltered internet around the neighbourhood? And so I've done everything I can within my household to keep my children safe, and they take their tablet out, walk 100 metres down the street, and are consuming unfiltered internet. That's where a benefit of if I had the knowledge of it, government was mandatory filtering CSA out of the internet, I could have confidence that my children are going to consume internet anywhere in New Zealand and it's safe. I don't have to think about where they're going. I know that swimming pools are fenced everywhere in New Zealand. I don't have to think about, has he fenced it? Has he fenced it? How tall is that fence? Is the fence durable? Is it suitable for a 3-year-old or an 8-year-old climate? I don't have to think about it. There's regulations, it's in place, don't have to think about it.
I'm going to try and wrap this up here so that we can all get to afternoon tea. What Shane and I try to do when we do these sessions is actually really explore the whole range of issues and arguments around this particular space, right? Because this is one that actually we've debated before in a really robust way when DIA introduced the exploitation filter. It's one that we'll probably have to talk about again, because the solution of filtering and blocking the internet is something that comes up all the time. And we both want, actually, people to be able to be informed and think about whether they stand on the spectrum of options around there. We've explored a whole pile of different ideas today, to different ways that government could interject and impose a mandatory solution of different kinds on there, through to a whole pile of other solutions that allow people to make informed choices of their own about how their internet in their homes acts and what allows them access to. What do you think we've covered today, Shane? Have I done a good job of summing that up?
I think you've done a good job of summarizing it up.
So there is actually then, before we go to afternoon tea, only one question left that matters. Who scored what points? And we kind of gave up on the scoring about halfway through when it was 6-5. Does anyone want to update the scoring? Shane and I thrive on this competition.
We could try for a show of hands.
Show of hands.
So who thinks that in some circumstances that you can define in your own head, we don't need to discuss what circumstances you can define, there is a place for mandatory filtering in New Zealand? Wow. Thank you.
And those of you that think to the contrary, that there isn't place for mandatory filtering?
I think you've got it. I think I got that one.
I think you've got it. Oh. Until next time, folks, if you've got suggestions about what you'd like us to debate next time we do this, please do. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. I did.
Awesome.